designers need to be more educated in the business field, product managers need to be a bit more educated in the design field. Why do you think this whole dynamic is happening, especially right now? And if you observed it started emerging earlier, why so?
I think the rise of design as a pillar discipline in software, it's been happening for a while, 15 years or maybe a little bit more. Very confident that smartphones, especially the iPhone, made the average level of expectation for the quality of design for any consumer or any user of business software really high. And I think that brought design into the fold in a much bigger way. We've had plenty of successes of companies like, Airbnb or Lyft or any other companies where design has been really critical in the overall experience and the success of the business. And as markets became more and more competitive, the importance of allocating resources well, right? And having people produce what matters most for that market, for that user, for that industry, made it so that design had to be much more aware of the business and contribute in more strategic ways.
Welcome to Growth Mates. This is Kate Suma, Growth Advisor, previously Head of Growth Design at Mira. Here you can learn how companies like Dropbox, Adobe, Canva, Loom, and many more are building excellent products and growth culture. Get all episodes and a free playbook for growth teams on our brand new website, growthmates.club. In this episode, I met Bruno Berger, a VP of Design and Product Management who worked in companies like Google, Metabase, and now he's teaching design for PMs on Reforge. By the end of this episode, you can learn about new rituals to introduce in your growth team work, the most impactful experiment on pricing from Vistia, and more ways to uncover growth opportunities if you feel stuck. To receive all episodes directly in your inbox, subscribe to growthmates.club. Hello, Bruno. Welcome to Growth Mates. How are you doing this morning?
Hi, Kate. I'm excited to be here. Recovering from a cold, but excited to chat.
Absolutely. Take care and take it easy. I will try to speak as much as I can as well on this show. Anyways, I'm super happy to have you here. And while preparing for any episode, I always like to explore the story behind the person, also to learn more about their personal growth story. And what actually surprised me and what I really noticed that from early days in your career, you combined product design with something else, which is just fantastic. And however, across all of these years, product design was together with you, was probably the core of what you are doing. So you started as a product designer and engineer back in the days. This kind of combination is quite popular these days as well, especially for founding designers. But then you also focused on design purely and design leadership at Google. Now you combine design and product management at the VP level at Metabase. And also you teach design for PMs, which is like super awesome topic at Reforge. And looking at your story, what makes me very curious to learn from you. If you could tell a bit about your story and what inspired you to combine product design always with something else across all of these years.
That's a good question. I don't know how intentional or deliberate that is. I've kind of discovered things along the way and explored different paths as they emerged. I'll say I come from design. I'm one of those weird kids who knew they wanted to be a designer, when I was 13 or something. I was making websites, for people, and I thought it was a cool thing to do. But also, I'm very curious and a generalist at heart. So I'll always find something adjacent to whatever I'm doing in order to get there, I think. Developing coding skills comes from, ironically, laziness, just not wanting to do something over and over again. I realized I could learn how to code and then discovered how rewarding that could be. But the story from design to design leadership to product and design leadership, the way I've experienced it is one of, as a designer, I was always one to want to make machines and not pictures, if that makes sense. A lot of designers come into design school and they want to make beautiful things on their own. And my thing was to make something that actually functioned and produced something for people on the other side. And so I started in design and I moved into product design, making software. And then I realized that as I had more leadership opportunities, that making the machine that makes the machine was even more interesting. So how do you put the people together, the processes, the tools for them to always be making awesome machines? And then as I progressed through that, I realized that I can only be confident that my team is working well and producing the right results if I really believe on a problem that we're solving, right? So I ended up moving upstream into product management to figure out what are the right problems, what are the worthy things of solving. So the machine that determines what the machine should be, should be producing. And I found a really good, happy place there in doing that.
This is interesting and super awesome to hear that, transitions and considerations. So I think overall, we can see right now that design discipline is becoming very generalist in a way. I myself was also a generalist from early days and combined design with business. And I felt and as I describe myself, half product designer, half product manager. However, officially, it wasn't official role. And it's interesting that now it's getting more and more popular. At the same time, designers need to be more educated in the business field. Product managers need to be a bit more educated in the design field. Why do you think this whole dynamic is happening, especially right now? And if you observed it started emerging earlier, why so?
I think the rise of design as a pillar discipline in software, it's been happening for a while, 15 years or maybe a little bit more. Very confident that smartphones, especially the iPhone, made the average level of expectation for the quality of design for any consumer or any user of business software really high. And I think that brought design into the fold in a much bigger way. We've had plenty of successes of companies like, Airbnb or Lyft or any other companies where design has been really critical in the overall experience and the success of the business as a whole. I think at the same time as tech became one of the main industries in the world, right? Software is eating the world and every single vertical is being affected. And there's some sort of company which is bringing software into it and changing it significantly. The importance of design, understanding each of those areas became, even greater, and the importance. And as markets became more and more competitive, the importance of allocating resources well, right? And having people produce what matters most for that market, for that user, for that industry, made it so that design had to be much more aware of the business and contribute in more strategic ways.
Awesome. And today, of course, we will discuss this topic of harmonizing product management with design and how both sides can shift their perspective, shift their ways of working to make this synergy even better. I'm super curious to hear from you. What inspired you to start teaching design for PMs? You're coming from the design background. At the same time, you're now doing or leading both disciplines. So why you chose this particular area, but not the other one, which is let's say, teaching designers about business and product management?
I think there are two tracks of reasons that got me there. One is having been on both sides and having seen how PMs tend to learn how to work with design from trial and error. Right, from actually going through cycles with the same designer or a different designer and understanding, picking up techniques or ways of communicating that actually allowed them to work well with those folks. It seemed really wasteful. I would see that mostly senior PMs would be able to have some way of interfacing well with designers. And if we could short circuit that and give more junior PMs or just PMs across the board tools to understand how designers think, how they work, and how to best work with them, I think people could get to a much better place and just make better software faster. So I think that's on one side. And I think the other, not only I've been, with a foot in design, a foot in product management, a little bit in engineering. I speak a few languages. I've lived in a few countries, and I end up finding myself being a translator in many situations, either for actual languages or just conceptual worldviews and things like that. So I saw there was an opportunity to have this kind of cross-functional perspective and help each other see how the other side thinks to get to a better place. I think the combination of those two made me feel confident that there was something I could bring to the table in how to approach that intersection, that interface between design and product management. And that's how I got into writing about it and then crafting this course.
This episode is brought to you by Appcues, the platform that helps you design, deploy, and test captivating onboarding experiences in minutes, not weeks. Appcues created the Product Adoption Academy, which includes courses, templates, and examples to help you level up your product adoption, and you can use it entirely for free. Check out the 5-step growth flow review template, which I created to help companies connect growth hypotheses with behavioral patterns to uncover meaningful improvements. Find an example of Dropbox onboarding inside and use this template to review any growth flows in your product. Get the template through the link appcues.com/growthmates.
This is awesome. And I think it's very interesting that from this desire to translate things, this desire emerged to translate these cross-functional relationships. And I think we both agree that there is a room for improvements in product and design relationships across so many levels. And I think to treat that well, we should think about both sides. We should think about what product management, like people can change in their approach and what design can improve or focus more on to be able to have this more, if we are talking about translation, meaning that probably these two disciplines are not speaking the same language. So we need to think about how to help them speak the same language then. And this is why I really wanted to focus the whole episode on that topic. We have been talking about that with previous guests just a little bit. And I think this theme, it's quite big and we can cover it fully or try to cover it fully on this episode. And because you worked in companies like Google, you have seen that at scale. Now you're working at Metabase where you combine these two disciplines, which is quite a rare combination probably even these days. And you teach on Reforge. Maybe you have some observations, some examples that you'd like to share, some good practices or not so good practices. So that would be super valuable. And to start from, we will start with PM as a discipline and how probably PMs could leverage design a little bit more, a little bit better in their approach and their ways of working. So just to start from it, what do you think PMs fail the most when it comes to building relationships with design partners?
I think that's a lot of what we discuss in covering the course. I think one of the most obvious ones is not involving designers early enough, right? Seeing design as a strictly execution function that comes into projects, comes into roadmaps, pre-relating to the process in order to give a shape, a beautiful shape, a valuable shape, but still just to shape something towards the end once it's been very well defined by people in product, maybe people in engineering. And that leads, obviously leads to some resentment by designers who want to be able to shape the work that they're working on at a more fundamental level, but also misses out on a lot of opportunity for designers to bring their very specific perspectives about the project that they're working on, right? So designers tend to look at things in a more holistic way. They're not focused strictly on the specific part of what's being worked on, but how it fits with the whole. They tend to integrate into broader design teams that will bring different perspectives from different parts of the product. Different people are working on different things. And when a PM brings a designer into the process pretty late, they miss out on all of those opportunities for that, right? And the range of explorations becomes really narrow. Usually the time to do that also becomes really short. I think another one, and probably the one that bites people the most, is not providing enough context, right? It goes a little bit hand in hand with this notion of bringing people in too late. The more a designer is able to understand why something is being worked on, why the specific constraints that have been set for that project, even technical constraints, are there, why a certain project's being worked on and what's going to come afterwards. The designer has a lot more information in order to decide where to invest given a certain project, right? Whether to go all in on I'm going to make this the very best possible experience that I can versus I'm going to make this, this is a checkbox type of project that we need to do in order for us to get to the big one later. Let's just do this really quickly and spend time later when matters most, right? There's a lot of a mismatch in how a designer will dedicate their effort and what they will emphasize if they don't have that broader context. Adjacent to that, I think, so what I see the most, especially in the day-to-day, is not aligning on expectations. And I mean, very, very basically in terms of, hey, this is a pretty small project, we can spend a couple of days on it, just put something together, and then we move on to the big thing, as I was just mentioning. And PMs often fail to just say that. So we'll see a designer will go for a week without coming back with mocks, and the designer is super excited about some micro interaction that they worked on. And the PM's wait, why? That's taking too long. And the designer just didn't know that was the case, right? There was no expectation. Or the designer's not given an opportunity to say, hey, this is important for whatever reason that they can bring into from their perspective.
I will summarize 3 things you've mentioned. So the first challenge is coming when they are not involved at the early stage because for some reason they are not getting involved. The second thing was about providing the context and the right context. And the third thing is like aligning on the expectations. So aligning on the expectations across the, let's say, is it something big or a big bad? And I have a framework that I can mention actually for that. I also noticed that problem a lot in my work, in my coaching work, etc., and Mira, and introduced this quite simple framework to align on these expectations early on, which has 3 types of initiatives, like quick win, meaningful shift, and big bad. And these 3 types of initiatives have different dimensions in terms of the problem. Is it well known? Is it already researched, or we have never tackled this problem yet? Other areas, for example, complexity of the potential execution, complexity of the design execution, and confidence areas. It's sort of matrix of different criteria that you can use just to quickly align on, are we talking here about the big bad or a meaningful shift or a quick win? And if we define on these dimensions, at least early on, we can continue working in a more productive way. Like we can treat at least this initiative as something like, we need to dedicate this amount of time. I also have this idea of like, what are the time scales for each type of an initiative? So like, quick win should take less than 2 weeks. Like meaningful shift can take a couple of weeks, and big bad is something quite large if we are talking about months or quarter work. So I wanted to ask you if you have some practices or examples for these 3 problems that you've noticed. So how product managers could approach that to make it better, to improve their relationships and speak the same language with design.
Yeah, definitely. So on involving designers early enough, I think for one, like communicating often, I think having a weekly, one-on-one with your designer seems very basic, but it's often missed. And using that time, not only for tactical discussions about, feedback on specific projects or status updates, but to really talk about the future and different time ranges, right? So things they're coming up soon, things are probably coming up later, to start to feed that context in and to hear back from the designer about what the perspective may be about those things, opportunities that they're seeing, so they can shape projects and roadmaps in a meaningful way. I think in terms of providing context, there are like 4 or 5 main practices that are really useful to do that. So one is clarifying goal types, right? Like something strategic, something small, something fixed. The framework that you talked about, I think goes a long way. The second is really providing visibility to sequencing, what comes after this, and where to dedicate effort. The third, is stating your appetite. You talked a little bit about how different projects have different timelines. Simply the idea of saying, hey, this seems like a 3-day kind of project, can really go far in. It's not about prescribing how long it should take, but it elicits a conversation like, oh, this seems bigger, this seems more complicated than I thought. And you can have a really good conversation there. And last one, as you're nodding, as we're talking right now, often that goes unmissed. It goes missed. Making sure that you're understood. So when a PM is talking to a designer, make sure that they're nodding. Ask designers to play back what you're hearing, to make sure that in their own perspective, in their own language, whatever the context that you're providing, makes sense to them. I think that covers some of the expectations as well as we're talking about.
Absolutely. And I think if we take all of that into consideration and imagining this is how it looks like, this is how it works, like providing right context, ensuring understanding, aligning on expectations, it seems like both product designer and product manager becomes a very deep thinking partners. And this is when I've seen the best possible collaboration happening. So if they both are owning the problem, owning the solution, they don't have these, strict boundaries. This is my work. This is your work. That becomes like magic. And this is when magic happens. And I've seen so many times in my coaching experience as well, when there are so many strict boundaries between some ownership and territorial type of relationships, like this is my design, I don't want to get so much feedback on that, or this is my strategy, I don't want you to be super involved into that strategy. This is, I think, the biggest mistake I've seen, setting up very, very strict boundaries. And this is counterintuitive because we are also talking about roles and responsibilities. What should be the responsibility of the product manager? What should be the responsibility of a designer? I think in just on the high level, it's quite clear, product manager is owning the roadmap and designer is owning the end tangible like solution and how it looks like, and they are producing these things, but it doesn't mean they cannot own it together and they cannot like just have a shared ownership of all of these areas. So this is something I think is very important as we are talking about product manager and product designer on this individual contributor level. But another thing I wanted to ask you about, because you are on a leadership level right now, and I worked also in growth leadership and design leadership, what are your observations on a leadership level when it comes to product leaders, let's say director of product, CPO, and design leaders like head of design? What can be improved in this type of relationships if there is anything which is not working well based on your plenty of your observations from your career?
Yeah. So something interesting that I see is that product leaders are often put in a position to run design, or at least oversee a head of design, and they don't have experience with that. And they're often like really well-intentioned, but unsure of what to do. So I got a lot of questions around that. The main failure modes that I see, especially in that kind of situation, are not understanding how designer motivations are usually like inherently different from PM motivations, not coaching PMs to work well with designers according to all the best practices that we're just talking about, and not inviting design leadership into strategic conversations, right, where they can help shape plans. And I think one of the things that when I started to lead PMs, in addition to designers are often see a lot of their identity as part of the design team. They have this design cred that emerges from the quality of their work as perceived by their peers there. And a lot of their motivations are about excelling and the craft in the eyes of those peers. While PMs are very goal-oriented and they want to accomplish whatever are their goals for their team and their product and their roadmap. And they don't tend to look to the sides as much. Like, of course, they want respect and support from people around them, but they're really motivated about, like, there's a very tangible, most likely measurable goal that I can accomplish, and that's what's going to show that I'm good. It's going to advance my career, while for designers is different. And product leaders coming to this now realizing that there is a big difference between those, and the feeling of a designer being respected by other designers can get squashed by the driven and goal-oriented way of approaching the PMs. And I think product leaders can be in a really important position to bridge that gap and to show each side how to understand each other and make things better.
The problem that I've seen a lot, which happens in this situation when product manager is very, very focused on the goals and metrics, especially in growth, and product designer still wants to deliver good quality and spend some time on that. And what I've seen across the companies who I talk to helped in this situation is making sure like the whole team has a shared goal and shared understanding on what quality means. And like delivering high quality becomes a principle for everyone, meaning that we cannot just think about achieving this metric uplift faster if the quality of that solution is not there yet. And then what is interesting, and probably as an idea for your course maybe, or just something you are doing, when we are talking about design for PMs, I'm trying to talk about what quality means and trying to educate PMs about not just like the craft and the quality, but also about UX principles, for example. What does it mean to have a good UX, and what is bad UX? What are the good patterns and what are the dark patterns, etc. So like this education piece is very helpful to help them start thinking about the quality just by default, without pushing these discussions, without artificial discussions on that topic, but just making it like a foundation for any relationships. And what I've also heard from some of the guests, like recently Jenny from Loom, who is head of product there, joined, and she shared that when they are interviewing product leaders or growth leaders, they are validating product sense. So meaning that they are trying to understand what is the sense of these people in terms of quality, even what are the products they admire and why, what do they understand about good user experience and bad user experience. And I really love that approach. I think this idea of integrating this part into this interviewing process for PMs, integrating this as a performance review criteria as well, is something that can help to build a better just foundation for the both disciplines.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's a place where product leaders can have outsized impact in reinforcing to the product management organization the value of those things, right? It doesn't matter. It's not enough for you to achieve these goals if the quality of the experience is suffering, right? And it's not okay to achieve those goals while squashing the input from from our design peers, and making sure that is part of the criteria for how PMs are evaluated, right? That it's something that product leaders are in a unique position to do, and make sure that those values trickle down. Yeah, you have the principles buttressing them up, and the reinforcement of what really matters day to day trickling down.
And before we move to discuss the other side, what designers can improve in their work to become more connected and build the synergy with product managers, maybe there is any practice that you'd like to share for PMs, just to take it as a to-do item, as an action item that they can quickly test and try out after listening to that, to improve their relationships with design peers.
Just talk to your designer often. Have regular one-on-ones with them. Understand what they're excited about, what they're worried about, and take that into consideration when you are discussing whatever projects are happening there. There's more happening around the person that you're working with than you may realize, and that affects the output, especially for something where subjectivity and honestly inspiration kind of plays a part, as it does with design.
What I think we can recommend, to everyone who is listening, is if you don't have a one-on-one with your designer yet, you can just schedule it right away, next week, next day, and see how it goes. And I've noticed that when teams start having these weekly sessions, it becomes so interesting for them to continue having them that they extend them. They have more time together. They have several one-on-ones each week to discuss to be thinking partners, right? So when I've been a designer, sometimes I had daily one-on-ones with my product managers just to think about the solution together. It depends on the phase of work, of course, but the more you talk, the better, especially if you are treating these conversations not as operational to-do items, agenda, check, but more like a thinking partnership, really thinking about the problem, thinking about the solution, discussing it together. Maybe even opening Figma together and designing it together. Why not?
Yeah, I think when you embrace the overlap, I think first you have to establish trust, right? I think if the two parties don't trust each other, they don't know each other well enough, there's no trust in the quality of the thinking and the basics of what they're producing, it becomes hard to go beyond that. Once you have it, try to have too sharp of a line between responsibilities is counterproductive. So, and I think a more positive way of thinking about it is how can you kind of offload some of your thinking to your partner, right? How can you leverage their different perspectives because you have such shared context, because you're both trying to get to the same place just from different angles. And then I think much better things can happen.
Yeah, fantastic. So now we can talk about the other side and product designers and what they can improve to leverage the business better, to have a shared understanding and maybe speak the same language with product managers. So we can start the same way. Where do you think product designers fail the most in these partnerships with product managers?
The patterns that I see the most are generally a lack of curiosity about the business, and often the technical underpinnings of what makes a product work, right? And understandably, designers want to focus on their craft and the part of what they're doing, but this tends to lead to this kind of asymmetry in the ability to have an informed discussion with the PM, right? A PM, if they're doing a good job, they have no option but to understand the business really well and to have fairly deep conversations with engineering to understand what the technical constraints are. If designers are not participating in those and they're not investing in understanding the reasons for decisions and for constraints, then they become a little bit downstream from whatever's being decided, which is the second thing. Often I see designers being a little bit too comfortable being downstream from requirements or constraints, not trying to shape them, not questioning them necessarily in a way it's hey, this is stupid, I'm not okay with that, we should change it, but really understanding why a certain roadmap is being sliced in a certain way, or why the scope of a project is tight as it is. Without understanding, you can't really shape it, right? And I think the third one is, as we talked about earlier, how designers have this other identity as a member of the design team right? It's been common in when offices were a thing for design to sit in one place, and then the product teams to be outsourced with the PM sitting with the engineers, but not the designers. It was like a design studio in a corner. There are reasons to do that sometimes, but it can lead to an overall unbalanced perception of what your first team is, right? Designers can end up have more allegiance to design as a function than to their product team, and then goes on a line and things lead to get to go to a bad place.
Interesting. In terms of my observations, I've been purely focused on growth in my career and when I was a designer as well. So this is where I've seen like huge curiosity in business. But what I haven't seen probably as much as I wanted to see is the welcoming of that curiosity, you know? It happens when sometimes like there are these strict boundaries. Product managers are thinking of business, don't care about that, don't go there, just do your work. Sometimes this territorial mechanism is happening even on a leadership level just to set up more clear boundaries. But I think if someone is curious about something, we should welcome that. And this is what inspired me also to educate like the designer community, designers about growth, discipline, educate myself, and to do all of these dozens of courses on Reforge when it wasn't that popular for designers to think about that. But I see so much value in that. So when you as a product designer know like what are the metrics, how to tackle them, how to measure them, why these things are happening, again, it's just becoming your language, your vocabulary that you're using in your conversations with stakeholders, with product managers, and it surprisingly becomes very smooth. And at some point, you start understanding some decisions way better. You start understanding why product manager is pushing for this particular direction without questioning it, just why we don't care about user. You just start understanding the business element a bit better, the constraints on the business side, how PM is measured, how their success is measured. So you understand why they are trying to ship it faster, because they have KPIs and they have roadmap and they need to ship things and validate them. So all of this synergy starts happening when you become just curious about business. And in my experience, what helped me become more like on the same page with business stakeholders. So first of all, it takes some effort to knock the door and be invited in these strategic conversations, just to sit there. Literally for the first year, I was sitting there in silence. I haven't shared anything I think about. I was just taking a lot of notes and asked questions just to better understand what is that machine, how does this business work. And after that, when I started asking good questions, people started understanding that I understand something about business, and they started inviting me to these conversations, to these strategic conversations. So I think this starts from this proactive idea and proactive curiosity, but then developing it, like taking courses that are more oriented towards like growth and product management together with design courses if you want, just to become more equal partner and just to become a reliable partner. So people would like to have conversations with you about the business element. Yeah. So, and if we are talking about some other things that designers can do to start shaping that relationships and maybe become more equal partners in terms of business, strategy, etc. Do you have any advice for this group of people who are interested in that?
I think a lot of what is said is spot on. I think like make sure that you understand. I've seen it to a very basic level sometimes, like a designer, very capable, smart, talented designer, not fully understanding how the company makes money, right? Like so, like how what's the business model? Like what is the role of your specific product or product area in that? You may know who the user is, but do you know who the buyer is? Why do they buy? You know, how are pricing plans defined? Why do we charge for these things in this tier and not this other one? What's a growth model? Why does the company go to market in the way that it does? I know your audience is like focused on growth and specific types of go-to-market models, but like if you have a sales-driven company versus a bottom-up SaaS company or consumer business, like understanding the mechanics of all of that, the cost of acquiring a user and why it's done in a certain way, just like mapping all that out will invariably put in a much better position to understand what's coming to you as maybe strategic directives, but also maybe ask questions about when something is inconsistent or it doesn't make a lot of sense. I think I would really hope that the curiosity that we're talking about is welcome, especially if it's just framed as such, right? Like I just want to understand. I'm not necessarily questioning the decisions. I just want to see what's there. And because then, designers don't end up swimming upstream against whatever's being decided elsewhere. I think also spending some time with dashboards, like I guess in growth, that's bound to be much more common anyway, but check them once in a while, not just for your very specific narrow slice of what you're working on, but the overall business, see what's changed, develop a feel for, what's working and what's not, and make sure that you're able to connect the dots between your team's initiatives and what's out there. Yeah, so I think a lot of those types of practices can go a long way.
Absolutely. And what I also noticed, if we are talking about the market and dynamics on this quite unpredictable market these days, that this business acumen is getting more recognized and more appreciated when you're making hiring decisions. So, of course, when I was hiring for my team, I've been looking for people who have this business acumen, because for growth, it's super necessary, but it was very, very hard to find this talent. Now, I think there is a bit more talent with this acumen, at the same time, not probably enough. And this becomes your differentiator even. I've seen it in my work as well when some folks who I coached were looking for a new career step, and I gave them this advice to introduce this business element that that in your portfolio, and how you present yourself and how you talk to people during the interview process. And I've seen how dramatically it paid off. It's some people received 4 or 5 offers after doing that, after showing not just the product and design work that you have done, but also the business context behind that, what success looks like that you wanted to push, and the impact of your solution, and how you experimented and how you iterated and what you measured and why you measured that, etc., etc. So building the full end-to-end business case around your product design work. And some folks shared with me, when they were presenting this business, let's say, background page on the screen of their portfolio, showing the business problem, what success looks like, what are the metrics they are driving, etc. The attention in the room was wow. They were surprised to see that in the portfolio, surprised to see this level of details. And I think regardless of the domain, if it's growth or not growth, I see a lot of value in introducing that business thinking whenever you're interviewing for a new role even. It becomes just necessary, because right now the market is not that stable, and people want to look for someone who really do care about the cost of things, about the level of confidence in building something and shipping something. So I would suggest to think about how you could introduce this business element in your day-to-day, but also being prepared for the next move, for example, how to treat your day-to-day work in a way that afterwards it could be presented in this business-focused way as well, not just pixels, not just craft outcomes. However, maybe I'm biased just to mention that, because I'm very focused on growth. Maybe there is something else, and you'd like to share it, especially as you've been on this intersection of product design and engineering. Maybe there is another way to develop yourself as a product designer these days to be more capable in the market dynamics. Yeah.
I would actually build on what you said, that when a designer who's not thinking in those terms hears what you're saying, it sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like the scope of their job is now all this greater, and it takes a lot of effort to get there. But I think I don't think the amount of effort is that much. I think especially when you're trying to understand your own business with a lot of people around you who can help you get there, it doesn't take that much effort, and curiosity is usually welcome. But actually becomes a lot easier, because you can be more confident about decisions because of the overall context that you have about it. And it becomes a hell of a lot easier to sell your ideas, right? So it's not like this extraneous layer that you add on top of things to tell a story. It's a lot easier to go through a product review and say, hey, I'm making these decisions because I know that user behavior in this other test, the drop-off was in this part, and we're trying to increase activation for this segment of the population and sending them in this direction in this way makes the most sense. I think it's by having more of that foundation about why things work the way they do and what we're trying to accomplish, just like getting people to buy into your ideas becomes a lot easier. So the net effort turns out to be lower than if you're strictly focused on trying to convince people through craft or just the subjective, qualities of something or principles or, UX standards. It's just, it's easier to get people to buy in if you speak their language, right? And if it seems that you're actually going in the same direction and not trying to bring this kind of orthogonal or inverse perspective to things.
Absolutely. And you reminded me about one more thing that I've noticed. It's also about this idea of reliable partnership when we cannot be indispensable, let's say. Something can happen and we need to move forward. And I've noticed a couple of situations in my last year coaching practice that sometimes PM left the team, let's say this happened. And who should care about the workload and backlog? And organically, it happened that designers took that responsibility for a while. And in order to be like a reliable partner, even in such situations, we can be better prepared if we know something about business, if we know how to prioritize initiatives, if we know how to distinguish between these quick bets, quick wins, meaningful shifts, and big bets. So we can be prepared in situation when we don't have someone to rely on, but we can move forward. I think I've had a couple of situations in my practice, in my work experience, when I just uncovered a problem to solve. Let's say design system wasn't established and there was no product manager who could tackle that from the engineering side, like to plan the backlog, etc. But I just wanted to make it happen. So I just created a project around that, organized the team. So basically it was like sort of project manager, product manager, and product designer at the same time. And I've seen product designers are becoming more interested in this. And sometimes they have their own projects inside the companies, like a pet project or initiative that they are driving themselves. Usually it's connected to improving the UX quality, etc., but it still has a lot of business element. It has a backlog. It has some idea of prioritizing this backlog, working with engineers directly. And I think it's helpful maybe also for companies to consider if they would like to give a little bit more space for designers to do these things. Maybe there is one side pet project that they can drive on their own per quarter, and it can be measured as a success as well as a success indicator, just to provide a little bit more space for these things. I think that could be an interesting thing for someone to try out.
I haven't actually seen too many situations in my career where a well-informed, coherent proposal from a designer was disregarded just because it came from design, right? I think if you do understand the context, right? If you do internalize the goals, and if you're able to connect your ideas to how they can move the needle, right? It doesn't have to be super tactical and like a small change here that can be obviously directly measurable. It can be more conceptual, but like, hey, we are having churn challenges with this segment of users. I think there's like improvements that you can make to this flow. Like it's just too clunky or it's too frictionful. There are ways for us to improve this that will make people, I'm pretty confident it can make people see more value in the product and stick around. I find it very hard to, if you use the language of the people who are in charge of allocating resources, the people who have to decide, do we do this or something else? If you speak their language, you're bound to be heard, really well. So yes, companies should make the space for that, but I think it's not terribly hard to carve the space, yourself. If you just cross the threshold a little bit to understand how decisions are being made, what metrics matter, what initiatives matter, and bring your case using that lens in addition to the quality, user delights, type of lens that you may have as your default.
This is interesting. I've also noticed, maybe as this ritual or like some takeaway for our listeners, that it's very helpful to collect this vocabulary for a while and then really starting using it consciously. Sometimes it can happen that you're using some words in the wrong way, like
oh my God, I just mixed the activation term with retention, week one retention, and said something which is super weird. But it's okay to make these mistakes. And I hope like leadership would still appreciate your effort and give feedback in case if it's not something relevant. But over time, and it takes a lot of work and practice. So over time, after I think 10 presentations or so, after doing this every single week or day, it will be just a natural vocabulary, as it happens with any other language. If we are using like all these words, how to measure success, activation metrics, retention rates, monetization uplifts, expansion strategies, blah, 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 we become just more natural with this vocabulary. And maybe my suggestion would be for folks who are interested in this combination of like design and business expertise, just start collecting this vocabulary and then start using it one by one. Like, let's make it a challenge. Every week, a new word in this vocabulary should appear, and it should be used in some format or way in conversations with PM, in conversations with stakeholders, in conversations with designers, by the way. I've noticed that I've been the only designer in the growth team for a while, and then the only design leader in the growth. And I was bringing this language to the design team, so to make them a bit more curious about this as well. And they became more curious, by the way. So I really, really enjoyed that. And just to also summarize this part about the design discipline and its evolution maybe in the coming years, because we see the market is not super stable, the emergence of AI is happening. What is your thinking where design discipline should evolve in the coming years? Can we expect seeing more people, product designers plus product managers combination, or more generalists like you are in the coming years?
It's a good question. It's hard to predict things, especially about the future. All right. So I suspect that connecting the dots between like user behavior, general trends, and business realities will always be valuable, right? I'm sure machines can help with that, but being able to spot the connections there and see what opportunities are will always be valuable. So some level of generalism will probably be good. If someone is too focused on craft and execution, then it's much more likely that they can be at least partially replaced by a GPU somewhere than if they're doing work which is hard to contextualize for a machine, right? That you're able to connect. Exactly what we just talked about. Like if we do this, we can move this, like business initiatives forward in a valuable way. Knowing how to use tools will invariably become more and more commoditized, right? And so understanding your users well and having good taste can't be ever fully automated. So I think that continues there. So I think I don't think becoming full designer PM hybrids is necessarily in the cards, because there's a lot more to product management than understanding the basics of the business, right? There's a lot of actually crafting strategy, being connective, tissue across different functions. There's some level of technical depth that I don't think it would be too reasonable to expect all designers to be interested or have the proclivities to do. But understanding the context in which you're operating and extending just one notch out or two from the craft, I think it's bound to make people much more resilient to the future and just make their work better in the day to day. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to summarize that, I think this thinking partnership will become the core of everything whenever the hands-on work can be automated, or the operational work can be easier and faster. We still need to be together to be thinking partners, like product managers, product designers, engineering. We all need to connect all of these dots and be reliable thinking partners. And I think this connection and these relationships will be way more important. Is the collaboration healthy in this group or team? Because now we are measuring it as a part of performance review, how they collaborate. Is it a good collaboration or not so good collaboration? But it's not the core of the performance result. If the team is delivering, regardless of their healthy or not healthy collaboration inside, it's usually appreciated, but the collaboration norms are not so much visible yet. So I think I would like to see more thinking partnership, more healthy collaboration, more like curious thinking together partnership in these teams in the future, when everything else can be just automated and can be easier. So this is where I think this whole world, the IT and tech world, should evolve, and maybe should focus on a bit more like, are we building a healthy collaboration here or not? So just thank you so much for all of the things you've shared. Just as a tradition, at the end, we are doing this lightning round, just asking you some simple questions. And if you have some other follow-up thoughts to share, feel free to do that. So the first question, as a tradition, is what was your maybe aha moment of the week? Maybe some news, maybe some content that surprised you or inspired you?
Yeah, so I don't read a lot of fiction. It's like once a couple of years I read a fiction book. And recently I just finished one, very like popular bestseller called Wonder. It's a story about a boy that has like these genetic conditions, that has a very unusual face and head, and like these struggles. And I think with the aha kind of moment for me, it was interesting, is that the book tells the story from his perspective, but also from the other characters. And of course, the main character has a lot going on given his condition, right? But then as you see the other people's perspective, like everyone has something going on, right? Like everyone's lives have their own challenges, and we don't see that easily. So it's like, it was a really good reminder to always be kind, like maybe kinder than necessary, because there's always like things going on that you can see beneath the surface. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. We will share it in the show notes. And maybe it's a reminder for us to be more empathetic to our partners, even at work. Like if we are unkind for some reason, like, I don't know, we are not moving as fast as we want, or we are not designing as good as we want. Maybe there is a reason behind that.
Yeah, don't attribute malice or incompetence or anything like that. Just like, hey, like, is everything okay? You know, like, can I help you with this? And I think it can go a long way.
Exactly. And maybe in addition to this weekly 101 idea, the question that should be always in these conversations is like, how are you doing? Everything is fine with you? Because I think sometimes we are just, jump, work, and like do all of these things and just forget to ask each other, like, how are you? Is everything all right? And I've seen, like, also again in this healthy, great partnerships between product and design, they are more than just co-workers. They are sometimes friends. They are sometimes just peers, just reliable peers, and they trust each other. So I think just being human is a good reminder.
Asking, hey, is there anything happening in your world that I could help you with? That can unlock so many things and can be super valuable.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The other question is like also probably about some resources or books, but more connected to the topics that we have discussed today. If you have some recommendation that could help either product managers or designers in building these healthy partnerships.
Yeah, I think there's a Reforge published a pretty good article that I contributed to. I think it's Bridging the Gap Between Design and PM or something like that, which I think can be super helpful. There's a bunch of, we put together a bunch of tips and ways of thinking to make this work in a very tangible way. In terms of books, I don't think like there's much that is specific to this yet. Maybe we'll get there and write the content. I think, and I don't read a lot of business books. They tend to be like too point in time. I like things that tend to have like longer shelf value. Two books that always, I think, come to mind for me are Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rumelt. People really misunderstand what strategy means. They mix up goals and strategy in a very significant way. So really thinking through like how the sum of multiple actions leads to something greater than that, and how the order matters. I think it's something that's very valuable, definitely for PMs to read, but I think it can help designers understand the ways of thinking of business leaders. And the classic like High Output Management by Andy Grove can really help, I think, especially designers understand why everything has to be measured so much, or why, like, how to make the black box of what's happening within the process understandable. I think you go a long way. It can be like a comparatively a long book for someone who's just a little bit curious, but I think there's a lot that people can learn from that.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Totally agree with this list, and we will attach all the links to the show notes. And last thing, it's a tradition here as Growth Mates is not just about me or you, it's about the community of people who are interested in growth and product and design. I would like to ask people if they have some recommendations of other folks who you'd like to see on this show someday, if any names come to your mind.
Well, I think would have a really interesting perspective about a lot of what we're talking about would be Yuki Yamashita. He's CPO at Figma and has been there for a long time, as far as I know. And so like making product-like growth in a product for an audience with very high standards, but it's also like a very complex product. I'd love to hear his perspective on all of this and more. I think someone else that could be interesting would be Tara Wellington, who's also an instructor at Reforge. She's a director of product at Build.com. And she focuses, her course about storytelling for PMs. So like how to actually craft those stories. And I think there's some interesting overlap there. I think another potentially interesting guest would be Dan Wolchanok. He's VP of new products at Reforge, ironically. But he has a really interesting path. Like he was in product and into analytics, to data, and then back into product. And now my understanding is he works on growing the Reforge product, which teaches people how to grow products, So like there's a really interesting kind of meta level of things there. And it's an educational product. So like how do you make PLG work for that? So there's a lot of really interesting things there. I'd love to hear you pick the brains of these folks.
Thank you so much. And it seems like it's going to be a Reforge band inside Growth Mates, because I've just had an episode with Bergher from also who is teaching on Reforge about the research topics. So, and now we had you, and it was very, very nice to meet you and have this conversation. Thank you so much for all the tips you've shared, and looking forward to sharing it with everybody else.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the show on growthmates.club and get free playbook with frameworks and insights. If you find this valuable, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and subscribe to the show on your favorite platforms to get new episodes. Let's keep growing together.